Hello and welcome to Notts TV Book Club, where we dive into the heart of all the literature and stories that shape our world. I'm really excited today because we're outside the DH Lawrence Birthplace and we're being allowed to go behind the scenes at the museum to find out more about DH Lawrence's life and his fantastic novel Sons and Lovers. Come with me. Hello and welcome to Notts TV Book Club, a time and place to talk about books with me, Becky Cullen. We're here at the DH Lawrence Birthplace Museum in Eastwood to find out more about Lawrence and his work, particularly his novel Sons and Lovers. And joining me are this panel of absolute beauts. So let's go over here. Number one, who are you and where do you come from?
My name's Jay Sandu and I'm like a poet, like a little bit of a musician and just general creative, getting involved in all sorts of nonsense in Nottingham.
You're like a poet or you are really a poet?
Depends what the audience
Okay, lovely.
thinks
That's a
of me,
good
yeah.
answer. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hi, I'm Hannah Trevathan, Director of Nottingham UNESCO City of Literature.
Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, hello, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Very well from Oldham.
Good.
My name is William Ivory. I'm from Southwell. We won't have that debate, but I am from Southwell in Nottinghamshire, which Lawrence wrote about a couple of times. And I'm a screenwriter and a playwright.
Great. So thank you very much for joining us here today. Let's find out a bit about what you've been up to. Billy, Disney, Netflix, what's going on?
Lots. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, which is good. It's good to be busy. But I'm writing. I'm finishing off. In fact, I'm supposed to be recording a film this year, filming something this summer, and I'm finishing a movie for Netflix, and I'm doing a play with Adam Penford at Nottingham Playhouse as well.
This is good like this. Cool down. You're just too hot.
No.
Okay. Hannah and Jay, I hear this rumour of an EP. What's going on?
It's not just a rumour. It's
real?
It's real. It's out in the world.
Wow.
It came out of a project that we did with New Art Exchange as part of their Transform citywide takeover last year. And we commissioned Jay to create a new piece of work representing Nottingham as a city of literature.
Yeah, and it was really interesting because having spoke to a lot of my circle of creatives and people that I know, finding that there's poets, there's spoken word artists, there's musicians, there's singers, rappers, and then actually thinking this is what makes Nottingham creative and what it is, and then putting all that together in a melting pot of culture clashes and we've got a grime track that uses Bollywood samples. Wow. And spoken word pieces that use random sound effects from songs that you've got to be a real music nerd to pick them up in. That
sounds really interesting. How can we get it? How can we find it?
Available on all streaming platforms.
Yes.
And if you search Belonging and Jay Sandu, it should come up.
Great, thank you very much. So here we are in the DH Lawrence Birthplace Museum, which has been open to the public since 1976. We asked museum curator and manager Carolyn Melbourne to take us behind the scenes. So here we are in the back bedroom. Tell us a bit about this, Carolyn.
So we're in the actual house where Lawrence was born and lived for the first 2 years of his life. And the house has been restored to the way we believe it would have looked when the family lived here. But there are lots of original features about the house as well.
So there's something about this wallpaper, fantastic wallpaper.
So the wallpaper that you can see on the walls, it is reproduction, but it was a special project whereby some of the original wallpaper that was dated from the time that the family lived in this house, it was reproduced. So the way this room looks, it looks exactly as it would have done when the family lived here.
So this is very exciting. This is the room that Lawrence was actually born in.
Yes, we believe that Lawrence was born in this room on the 11th of September 1885. Mm-hmm. It's the front bedroom, so the house is a typical 2 up, 2 down with an attic. So mother and father tended to sleep in the front bedroom, and Lydia wouldn't have gone into hospital. There would just be a local woman who would have come and helped to deliver the baby.
Tell us a little bit then. So we've mentioned when Lawrence was born. Give us a bit of a potted biography, if you don't mind.
So I think if you want to understand Lawrence better, a really good clue to his character is his parents' marriage. So they were a bit of a mismatch as a couple in certain ways. Lydia was, she was from the working classes, but a bit more on the refined end. She'd had a decent education. Aspirational is the word. She spoke very nicely. She was brought up in the Kent area, so she spoke with quite a southern accent, which made her sound quite posh.
Yes, quite.
Yes, and she just wanted her children to get on in the world. She wanted them to get good educations. She didn't want the boys to become coal miners.
No.
She didn't want the girls to marry coal miners either. And that's quite an unusual attitude to have in the Eastwood of that time.
Yeah, and kind of set the family apart from other people in the area.
Yes, and in contrast, you see, Lawrence's father, Arthur, was very much embedded in this community. He was from a coal mining family, in that he and his brothers, cousins, uncles, friends, all worked in the many mines in the area. His father was actually a tailor for the mines.
Wow.
So he still did work for the mines, but he wasn't a coal miner as such. But most families in Eastwood at that time were connected in some capacity to the many mines.
Lots of things in here that are associated with Lawrence and his family.
So this is an original Lawrence family item. So interspersed throughout the historic rooms, you'll see items which actually belonged to the family. This bedside table is quite unusual. It's a bit like a convalescing table. And we believe that Lydia had it towards the end of her life when she was very ill.
And there's a fantastic bit in Sons and Lovers, isn't there, where they grind up the morphine and bring it in for the poorly mother. So it's making me think about that, Carolyn.
Yeah, well, it is. We do room set a little bit to tell the story of Sons and Lovers. So because it's semi-autobiographical, Lydia probably had this when she was lying on a deathbed.
Yeah.
And we do have some medicine bottles here.
Here we are in the heart of the home, Carolyn. Tell us a bit about it.
Yes, like you say, this was the heart of the home. It's where everything happened, everything took place. And Lawrence is obviously drawing on that. He's drawing on real life. So you get some lovely bits in Sons and Lovers where the mother is spitting on the flat iron and the parents' chairs are either side of the fireplace. So the mother has a rocking chair one side of the room and the father has a high back Windsor chair the other side, where he's often found mending shoes, which apparently is a pastime.
Yeah, and at one point the children are making fuses as well.
Yes, as you do,
which
with
is incredible.
gunpowder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, get your children involved with that. And lots of references to the Bible and so on everywhere.
Yes, Lydia was very religious all her life. So throughout the museum you'll find lots of religious texts and imagery, and that is to reflect what Lydia would have had on the walls.
It's always a good idea to watch and pray.
Watch and pray.
Yeah, let's go and do that now, shall we?
Yes.
Here we are in the parlour, and it mentions in the novel the vicar coming round for tea. Are these the kind of things we could expect on the table in here?
They're exactly the kind of things, because this is part of the original Lawrence family best china tea service, which was donated to us just a few months back.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, they would certainly come in here and take tea, perhaps after church on a Sunday, because they didn't use the parlour every day. It was for Sundays and special occasions.
So I'm very fond of the part of Sons and Lovers where Mrs. Morell unwraps her shopping and she's got a lovely dish she's bought off the potman.
Off the potman. Well, this belonged to a lady called Maud Thirlby. She was a neighbour of the Lawrences, and she bought it from the Friday market, which would have been outside the Sun Inn in Eastwood, for 3p. And Lawrence was with her at the time, and he bought one identical to give to his mother.
Wow.
So we have the one that she owned, but Lawrence would have bought one exactly the same to present to his mother.
That's
and
amazing.
I think that's probably the little jam dish that's mentioned in Sons and Lovers. So yes, you keep your best items in here to show off a little bit, but you would come in here to entertain each other. They'd They'd play songs on the piano, they'd have a sing-along, they might play parlour games, but it was really a room for entertainment.
And as well, there's still that connection to religion, singing hymns at the piano as well.
It was very often religious songs, hymns that were being sung, yes.
Softly, in the dusk, a woman is singing to me, taking me back down the vista of years, till I see a child sitting under the piano, and the boom of the tingling strings, pressing the small poised feet of a mother who smiles as she sings. In spite of myself, the insidious mastery of song betrays me back, till the heart of me weeps to belong to the old Sunday evenings at home, with winter outside and hymns in the cosy parlour, a tinkling piano our guide. And so it is vain that the singer should burst into clamour with the great black piano appassionata. The glamour of childhood days is upon me, my manhood cast down in the flood of remembrance. I weep like a child for the past.
Welcome back to Knott's TV Book Club. We're here at the DH Lawrence Birthplace Museum in Eastwood with this beautiful panel of literary experts. So before the interval, we had a reading by Liam of the beautiful poem Piano. I wanted to ask you, Jay, as a fellow poet, what you made of it.
I thought it was really interesting how he kind of uses music as a bit of a trigger to kind of get into it, but also the rhyme and the rhythm. When I was reading it, I was almost hearing like a beat with it and kind of comparing it to a lot of spoken word artists that are around now that use either music to lead into pieces or maybe a line from it or had their connection to childhood through music. I just thought that was really interesting going back, because I've not read it for a long time, and then going back to reading it and I was like, oh, yeah, there's these little bits that kind of take you on a journey through his childhood, but use music as like the lens of the anchor, which is something
kind
that I
of
find.
contemporary connection. What about you two? Should start with you, Billy.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it just reminded me, you know, the old Leavis thing about that Lawrence was all about felt life, and it just is that ability to be there. You know, I just felt you were there. You sort of, you know, like that child, and it was also so. He just manages to kind of conjure up such strong feeling without being sentimental. I don't think he's at all, but yet full of sentiment. I just thought it was beautiful.
Yeah. There is that kaleidoscopic kind of quality to it, Hannah.
I think that's the thing with Lawrence's work. You feel very like rooted in place and experience and feeling, and I think that's the kind of beauty of him as a writer, that you feel very strongly about what he kind of gives to you as a reader.
Yeah, and there's lots of that in the novel. So I'm just going to give a bit of an introduction to the novel. So Sons and Lovers is set in Eastwood and the area. It's semi-autobiographical, telling the story of the Morell family, their 4 children, who are struggling between the upbringing of their mother, very straight-laced upbringing, if you like, and the mining community of the father's family. So it's a novel that's got first love, it's got friendship, it's got fights, it's got fiendishness, let's face it. And it's all set against the backdrop of the rising middle class in the early 20th century. So this is a classic. We thought it'd be really great to hear an extract before we start discussing it. So we asked Billy to record a section. This section is about Arthur Morell, getting ready for work in the morning.
He went downstairs in his shirt and then struggled into the pit trousers which were left on the hearth to warm all night. There was always a fire because Mrs. Morell raked, and the first sound in the house was the bang bang of the poker against the raker as Morell smashed the remainder of the coal to make the kettle, which was filled and left on the hob, finally boil. His cup and knife and fork, all he wanted except just the food, was laid ready on the table on a newspaper. Then he got his breakfast, made the tea, packed the bottom of the doors with rugs to shut out the draught, piled a big fire and sat down to an hour of joy. He toasted his bacon on a fork and caught the drops of fat on his bread. Then he put the rasher on his thick slice of bread and cut off chunks with a clasp knife, poured his tea into his saucer and was happy. With his family about, meals were never so pleasant. He loathed a fork. It is a modern introduction which has still scarcely reached common people. What Morell preferred was a clasp knife. Then, in solitude, he ate and drank, often sitting in cold weather, on a little stool with his back to the warm chimney piece, his food on the fender, his cup on the hearth. And then he read the last night's newspaper, what of it he could, spelling it over laboriously. He preferred to keep the blinds down and the candle lit, even when it was daylight. It was the habit of the mine. At 5:45 he rose, cut 2 thick slices of bread and butter and put them in the white calico snap bag. He filled his tin bottle with tea. Cold tea without milk or sugar was the drink he preferred for the pit. Then he pulled off his shirt and put on his pit singlet, a vest of thick flannel cut low round the neck and with short sleeves like a chemise. Then he went upstairs to his wife with a cup of tea because she was ill and because it occurred to him. "I bought you a cup of tea, lass," he said. "Well, you needn't, if you know I don't like it," she replied. "Drink it up, it'll pop thee off to sleep again." She accepted the tea. It pleased him to see her take it and sip it. "I'll back my life, there's no sugar in it," she said. "Yeah, there's one big un," he replied, injured. "It's a wonder," she said, sipping again. She had a winsome face when her hair was loose. He loved her to grumble at him in this manner. He looked at her again and went without any sort of leave-taking. He never took more than 2 slices of bread and butter to eat in the pit, so an apple or an orange was a treat to him. He always liked it when she put one out for him. He tied a scarf round his neck, put on his great heavy boots, his coat with the big pocket that carried his snap bag and his bottle of tea, and went forth into the fresh morning air, closing without locking the door behind him. He loved the early morning and a walk across the fields. So he appeared at the pit top, often with a stalk from the hedge between his teeth, which he chewed all day to keep his mouth moist down the mine, feeling quite as happy as when he was in the field.
Thank you very much for that, Billy. Well read.
Thank you very much.
Some would say you do it for a living.
Oh, God. We wanted you to hear this, but unfortunately we got Billy to read it.
No, never. So let's start with the general mood of the novel. Hannah, do you want to sum that up for us?
Ooh, big question.
It is a big question.
It's a big book, really. I think it kind of, as you say, it touches on life and love and this tension between desire and wanting to move up in the world, and especially through the parents, Gertrude and Walter, and that also the idea, there's a real tension between love and hate in the novel as well, which I found really interesting to reflect on while I was rereading it.
What did you make of it, Jane?
I quite liked, like I've said earlier, the bits of the book that were describing parts of Nottingham that I've spent now, and the way it's described back then to how that area is now. Like even when they're talking about the river and going down there, I've been down the river on a boat and it just feels different to how they was describing it. Like it was really peaceful and like calm, but like now there's the football match going off, there's building works here, there's this there, and it was just interesting seeing the difference between then and now, but also weirdly similar as well, because the water is still calming, even though there's this craziness going on, and little pockets of bits like that when I was going back and I'd seem to have forgotten some of the parts of the book and be like, oh, yeah, this is what's happening here, isn't it? I thought that was really interesting, and that kind of took me back as well. Yeah,
and just talking about that way, the way that the community has changed or the city's changed. Billy, did you pick up about, it's a really fantastic representation of a mining community, and also the joyfulness of that work sometimes comes out in the writing.
Yeah, it does, and it's interesting because you know, but bit like you, I loved sort of recognising places that I'd been and how they'd changed everything. But what was really interesting as well was I think we were talking a little bit earlier about that Nottingham character, you know, that there's a kind of, and there is a cussedness to Nottingham.
Mardiness.
A Mardiness.
Yeah, okay.
But also, I think it was Isilito who said, you know, Nottingham looks after you, it'll look after you. And it does. And I think within those mining communities, you just see that, you see a kind of microcosm, and the way he's written it, of all that generosity, but also that kind of the sort of the abrasiveness as well. And I love that kind of, and the humour as well, that very kind of, quite a dark humour at times.
Yeah.
I love the way he portrays that.
It goes with the language as well, doesn't it? No, I was full of brazenness and mucky little usses and, you know, remembering all these fantastic words that aren't in common usage, but they're all kind of in our blood, if you like. In my blood anyway. I had to memorise huge chunks of it at A-level, so I can't.
Exactly, but the fact they used to call him Dirty Bertie round here.
Dirty Bertie.
Dirty Bertie, I mean, that says it all, you know, but you can't get ideas with your station, writing all them books.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point then. So just thinking about the way that the women are represented in relation to they are presented in relation to the men, but also in their own right. What did you make of that, Hannah?
I think it's so interesting because you have the characters of Gertrude and Miriam, and they're learning French and algebra, and it's seen as something that they do in the evening, but there is this sort of tension specifically with Gertrude, that she's seen as being a bit different, a bit of an outsider when she marries Walter, but that she sort of falls for him because he isn't like that, because he loves dancing and he's got this real charisma, but you see through the marriage.
Doomed.
Yeah, it's doomed. But she then wants this better life for her
flame
sons.
of life. Yeah.
I always thought with that, like, it's even still now representative of the Nottingham creative scene. Like, I don't know if there's many creatives that just do one thing. Like in Nottingham, you'll see a creative that might be a painter, but they'll also be a poet, or they'll also be a this, or they'll also be a that. The weird little niche pockets of creativity in Nottingham that you can find, which is another bit that I kind of thought in there was interesting.
Because Paul's a painter, isn't he? But he's working as well, and he has all these different aspirations. It's incredibly they're all incredibly well read, actually. So there's this thing, and Mrs. Morell's in the guild, which is amazing. So you've got that view of things changing and people having more access to education.
And I love them going to the library and taking the books out each week, and I'm getting this one for my mother, and we're going to read this. That was really, I just loved those scenes.
And you know, that I can remember when I first read it, you know, and it was a long time ago, I can tell you. And but there's that bit, you know, when Paul Morell's won a prize, and his dad said, "How much is it worth then? This prize as you've won," and that kind of that constant, you know, straight away between commerce and learning for the sake of it, and what learning gives you versus, you know, working down a pit and needing to pay the wages, and that friction, you know, is still there, isn't it? Gig
That is creation, isn't it? Have you got one word, Hannah?
Floral.
Because
there's some really beautiful descriptions of nature and the landscape.
Beautiful pansies.
Beautiful pansies.
Yes.
I'm going to get aspirational.
Because
of how Nottingham's portrayed in it, and like the opportunities that you can get from going to a city like that or town.
Very good, thank you. What about you?
You know, tumescent, because it's a Lawrence word, and it's a novel all about growth, and it's a novel about sexual
awakening.
Awakening, yeah.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, everybody. That's it for part 2. Join us in part 3 for more on Sons and Lovers, and we'll also hear from Dr. Annalise Grice. Welcome back to part 3 of Notts TV Book Club from the DH Lawrence Birthplace Museum. Lawrence remains a controversial figure in literary circles, partly because of his banned book, Lady Chatterley's Lover. I asked Dr. Annalise Grice to tell us more.
Hi, I'm Annalise, Dr. Annalise Grice. I've written a book on DH Lawrence after completing a PhD on Lawrence at the University of Nottingham. I'm also the editor of the Bloomsbury Handbook to DH Lawrence. I was brought up in Nottingham, so from that perspective, I came across Lawrence in the local library, plug for the libraries, and Absolutely loved his writing. It felt like coming home, I think, in a strange way. So he talks about the hemlock stone where I walked my dog every day when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. I loved the kind of cadence of his writing and the intensity and the way he talks about desire and nature. And the style of his writing, it was something that I'd never read before, and I was immediately hooked and had to go to Nottingham and look at the manuscripts and study his work there.
What about this view of DH Lawrence as a grumpy old man, or a grumpy middle-aged man, or just a grumpy man altogether? What do you make of that?
Well, my study focused on the early Lawrence, and the early Lawrence is a completely different man to the probably later, very ill, so kind of grumpy, angry Lawrence. So if you read Jesse Chambers' memoir, A Personal Record, you'll see what a wonderful, lively, vital young man Lawrence was. How he was so loved by the Chambers family at Hagg's Farm. And you know, his vibrancy, his love of drama and singing, and going all over the Annesley Hills talking about Lorna Doone and enacting it on the hills. You know, absolutely fascinating young man who's full of energy, full of life and love of literature and everything. You know, absolutely autodidact.
The kind of charismatic character.
Absolutely.
And what about the idea that D.H. Lawrence didn't think particularly well of women? What would your response to that be? You do get different representations in the different books.
Well, what I would say is that Lawrence is somebody who really portrays women having sexual desire, which is quite significant at the time he's writing, coming out of the kind of stuffy Victorian period, you know. He wasn't afraid to talk about the female orgasm in a way that I think is even possibly still unsurpassed today. He wasn't afraid to talk about sex outside of marriage, and question the very kind of nature of women accepting marriage and accepting that kind of those traditional life roles. So Ursula in The Rainbow and in Women in Love, you know, she's constantly working against these traditional conventional notions of what women should be or should do. Throughout his life, he's coming across very strong women. We could talk about that some more. That's a big topic that we could have thinking about his mother, his relationship with Jesse Chambers, and then meeting Frida, which really kind of changes his life.
Finally, have you got a favourite D.H. Lawrence writing?
Oh, big question. I mean, Sons and Lovers has to be up there. I think that's the first book I ever read of Lawrence's, and I was immediately hooked. So that's wonderful. Lady Chatterley's Lover is wonderful for the kind of 1920s culture, that kind of satirical, ironic voice that Lawrence has, and that you know, character of Oliver Mellors, who is very complex, should we say. But you know, The Rainbow and Women in Love, equally wonderful novels. Women in Love, possibly one of the best modernist novels. So short answer is probably Sons and Lovers, but you know, you've got a great field of choice there.
So some really interesting points in that clip there. I just want to pick up on the idea of women and women's desire. Billy, you've adapted various different Lawrence novels for the screen. Is that something you took into account during your adaptation?
Yeah, very much so, because I mean, certainly when I did Women in Love and The Rainbow, there was, you know, I was very kind of conscious of not wanting to kind of, especially as a bloke writing it as well, not wanting to repeat any tropes, and having spoken to academics, and then just the reading I did myself, I mean, it seems to me that Lawrence is very fair with the women, because they are all kind of agents of their own desire, of their own change. They're often held in bondage, but they're held in bondage by society, and also the fact that they're seen to have that desire is seen as a kind of a negative thing, you know. And as Lawrence said, you know, he got into trouble for voicing some of that, but that wasn't his own position at all. He was, you know, trust the writer, not the, whatever he said.
Yeah.
Trust the writer, not the novel.
Trust the writer, not the story.
That's it. Trust the writer, not the story.
Yes, that's right. Or the other way
Trust
around.
the story,
Trust
not the writer.
Man's
an idiot.
But,
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
you're not an idiot. You should know. You know what you're talking about. So there is that passion and for lots of different things. What about the passion for the area? Do you think that comes through in this novel, Jane?
I kind of looked at it and there were some bits that I kind of felt were very like almost like individually rebellious against stuff that was happening in Nottingham and like around like class and identity and stuff like that. And there's some bits of it that I do think show Nottingham in a good way, and then there's some bits that obviously we'll know show Nottingham and Eastwood in a bad way, which is why I think some people weren't happy with certain bits with it. And I thought it was really good to have the balance of it, because if like being from Nottingham, you know it's not all good and it's not all bad, and the balance was nice to see even at that time. And then like I said, I really enjoyed the bits of the rebellion kind of coming through, these people being like, this is kind of what they expect from us, but actually I don't want to do that kind of thing, which I thought was...
Yeah. Do you think, Hannah, that this is a novel that translates to other audiences? I mean, so you're a City of Literature person. Is it a novel that people can really grasp in different cultures?
I think the themes of kind of desire and love and family tension translates. And I also think that Lawrence is such a great ambassador for Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. Like, he was here and then he travelled around the world. But the kind of way that he writes and the way that he talks about nature and place, people can always identify with that. They see that kind of place can be written about, as Jay says, in a positive way and a negative way. But I think he's such a fantastic writer representing our area, and that is just a really great thing to be able to share with the world.
I think you're right. I'm going to talk about favourite bits. So I'm going to share my favourite bit, which is when Mrs. Morell gets back from the market and she's bringing out the pansies and the china with cornflowers on, and they're talking about how much it cost and what they could put in it, and there's, you know, cucumber or fruit or whatever. I absolutely love the detail of that, and the idea of them pouring over this precious piece of china together. How about you, Billy? Have you got a favourite section?
I've got actually two, and I think they sit together. One is, and again, forgive me, I might seem, it's when Paul puts on Clara's stockings when just before they make love, and it's just such an astonishing moment that speaks of kind of confusion and desire, and then if Lawrence was about sex and death, which I think he was, then the other bit is when he and his sister crush up the morphine, and they actually they put that in a glass of milk, and
it's really dark.
Yeah, it's really dark. And I think if you put those two bits side by side, you've got that kind of that central, that the area where Lawrence believed transcendence resided, which was in sex and in death.
Yeah. You just reminded me of my English teacher. Sex and death, that's all it's about.
Sorry. But...
No, that's all right. But it's really dark. Jay, how about you? You've got a favourite piece?
I think I mentioned it earlier, like the river bit and the kind of juxtaposition of it feeling like it's calm, but actually the internal battles that the characters were having at that time, and then kind of being like knowing the Trent and knowing it might look calm, but if you've been on a boat in the Trent, it's not calm. And I thought that and I don't know if that's just from being in Nottingham and having like the little experiences like that, so it added to it, or whether it was just written in a way that anyone could get grasp of that. Like you kind of said, it wouldn't matter kind of where it was. But I just like the fact that there was a lot of like layers to that scene, especially like, and if you like going back now, looking at it with an analytical eye opposed to just reading it for pleasure, you can really like dive into the bits of it, like, oh, you was actually talking about that. Oh, you actually meant that. And it was, I really enjoyed it looking at the whole book in a different lens to when I first read it for just like,
it does change. It does change. You know, who you identify with or feel sorry for or empathise with changes depending on the period of your life in which you read it. It's really interesting. So where do we go next with Lawrence? If you like this, you might also like just a title.
Women in Love.
Women in Love. If you like this, you may also like...
Does it have to be a Lawrence?
No.
I was going to say The Line of Beauty by Alan Hollinghurst.
Yes. If you like this, you may also like...
I found a bunch of Lawrence poems that I'd not read before,
great.
because I didn't realise that they were about, and
Yeah.
then I found them and found loads of those really interesting.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, Jay, because we're now going to, just before the break, we're going to hear another of Lawrence's poems called Kill Money.
Kill money. Put money out of existence. It is a perverted instinct, a hidden thought, which rots the brain, the blood, the bones, the stones, the soul. Make your mind up about it, that society must establish itself upon a different principle from the one we've got now. We must have the courage of mutual trust. We must have the modesty of simple living, and the individual must have his house, food, fire, all free like a bird.
Hello and welcome back to this special DH Lawrence focused edition of Not TV Book Club from the DH Lawrence Birthplace Museum in Eastwood. So for this part of the show we have three fabulous actors from Nottingham Actors Workshop who are going to perform three of Lawrence's short poems for us.
I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself. A small bird will drop frozen dead from a bough without having felt sorry for itself.
The tiny fish enjoy themselves in the sea. Quick little splinters of life. Their little lives are fun to them in the sea.
I wish people, when you sit near them, wouldn't think it necessary to make conversation and send thin drafts of words blowing down the neck of your ears and giving you a cold on the inside.
I think they're really interesting poems and they say something about, well, all the poems that we've featured in the show say something about the enormous reach or range of Lawrence. Do you want to say something about that, Billy?
Yeah, I mean, he always, listening to those poems, for instance, he just always surprises me because he can be so sort of down to earth and sort of matter of fact, and then he can be a great intellect. And I mean, I always think with his work that there's a kind of, because I don't like all Lawrence, that's the thing.
Yeah.
You know, not all of his, I don't understand a lot of his work, and a lot of his work I find too much in the head. But I also think he's
repetitive.
Yeah. But I also think I do think he's one of the greatest writers in English as well. But I think it's the difference between, there's the Lawrence that knows, and then there's the Lawrence that theorises. And even in those poems, and I find that the one who can just talk about splinters of light, fish being like, and we've all been, talking about the river earlier. We've been all at the Trent or at the Greet in Southall, and you see those little flickers of light. And it's funny because the further he went from there, when he came back to Nottingham, those memories of growing up and working class life, that to me is when he just explodes and just becomes incredible.
Yeah, kind of write what you know.
Yeah. I mean, it really is that. It really, but he had this intellect which was always, and sometimes I don't think he's struggling so much to express the inexpressible almost, or the unexpressible rather, that you see that in the work, it becomes contorted. And it becomes awkward.
It's very difficult to express those kind of existential issues in plain language or metaphor.
I think you see it in this work and other work, and as Billy's been saying, the real tension between the head and the heart. And I love that in his work, that the kind of expression of desire, and you see it especially in Sons and Lovers with kind of Miriam and Clara, of the kind of feeling in the body but wanting to be up here as well. I can't marry this woman because I'm her friend and I want to talk with her and be intellectual, but the desire to, have it off with another woman by the river.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think?
I think there's big parts of his work across the board that feels either like he's shouting or playing. Like when
really
I think,
good description.
like when I look at some of the smaller poems or the bits that like you said, I don't really find anyone that likes all of his stuff, which I find really interesting. Like as a creative that does all sorts of stuff, some people really connect with certain bits and some people really don't. But I do like the fact that sometimes it does just feel like he's just playing.
I mean, and some of the poems are very overt, aren't they? So, for example, the Kill Money poem that we had earlier on. Yeah. So, Tim from the Actors Workshop said he used that as an exercise with the actors that go there. They were surprised at how contemporary that poem is and how that issue is still very much with us. You know, what did you make of the class and money and...
It's in everything though, isn't it? In everything that he writes, and in a way it's kind of the... my grandma was called Gertrude, funnily enough, and I can remember growing up, and my mother was so insistent that we would get educated, and interestingly that we would get out. You know, that was the thing, and that you. But with that kind of, when you get that in your head, it's sometimes it's hard to kind of look back fondly always, but also you're always pushing and you're always questioning, and I think that's why he seems. I mean, I think he's the bravest of writers. Having said I don't love all of his work, but because I think that what's really interesting about him is that he's not, like you were saying, Jay, that not a lot of creatives, they get. You know, when people say that classic thing, a critic will say it's a return to form. Yeah. They literally mean that. They mean it's gone to a form that we find acceptable. Yeah. Whereas what Lawrence was doing all the time, because of that inquiring nature, because of that need to be pushing, he was prepared to go beyond, and sometimes into areas where it didn't work. But that's brave, isn't it? You know, we that, as a writer, as a creative.
Literary David Bowie.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I think I was recently asked a question like, what does creativity mean? And I think what you see in Lawrence is that bravery, the creativity to fail, to not always get it right, but to see where the form takes you, what feeling does it bring up, and he is just a very audacious writer, I think. Yeah.
We have these three, our city is built on these, well, whether it's not built on it, it's built on a massive rock, but three literary reputations of Byron and Lawrence and Sillitoe have something in common, all white men. Do you think that the literary scene now is representative of that? Should we go to you, Jane?
Yes and no, is what I'll say. Like, I still find it mad that the GCSE poems are still what I was doing at school. Not changed at all. When, even if you look at Nottingham alone, the more modern contemporary poets and artists, they're still talking about class, they're still talking about identity, they're still talking about having to move to feel like they're fitting in. Yet, with the style hasn't changed. Like now, I think a lot of it's written to be performed. Like we spoke about earlier, there's no recordings of DH Lawrence saying any of these poems, and I would have loved to see, because it's got rhythm and it's got beat and it's got interest and repetition in it, really see how he expected that to be brought to the world.
Isn't it, the poems,
and it was those sorts of things that I find really interesting with it.
Hannah, what about you? Because you're often hawking Nottingham's literary heritage around the world, for want of a better word.
Oh, I love that. I think I should say I always talk about our contemporary scene and some of our kind of other brilliant writers that we have had in our kind of literary heritage, like Dorothy Whipple and Margaret Cavendish, to like name two women. But I think what is good through the lens of Lawrence and Byron is they travelled, they took Nottingham out to the world, they saw the world, they took inspiration from that. And as a city of literature, which will be 10 years old this year, I think it's a really great illustration that you can be from Nottingham and see the world, but also bring the world back into Nottingham. And we are known through the lens of these writers in Greece and Mexico, Sardinia, other places, and it's a good starting point to be in an international network, to have these writers who took a global view.
Yeah, there's something really heartening about being here in this Victorian house from such a humble, it sounds a bit patronising almost, but from such a physically small space to be a writer who has a place on the global stage is an incredible thing to be proud of. Do you think that he remains, or we make enough of Lawrence as a role model or an inspiration for writers today?
Well, I think he's. I'm hoping he's due another upswing because his reputation is always going to. I just think it will, just will. But I think he's. I think one of the two greatest 20th century English writers, you know, and I think that he's. I think he's very, very good. And to go back to the early part, to the other point you were making, it's quite interesting because, you know, I was brought up, because I'm older than everybody here, I was brought up very much on that tradition of you know, the great tradition and dead white European males in terms of the literature I kind of grew up on. And you know, and I'm very pleased to see that now is changing, and I think, Jay, everything you're saying is right. I mean, you know, I can remember all the poetry, the performance poetry when I was about 15, 16. That's starting, and loved seeing Linton Kwesi Johnson and John Cooper Clarke and all that kind of stuff, and I love all of that. But also, I think there's still a place. There's got to be, because they're so very, very good.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's room for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's the point, isn't it? We want more, not
less.
The exclusion of.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it. We have come to the end of our fabulous show. I hope you've enjoyed the show and finding out more about DH Lawrence's work and life. I'd like to do a few thank yous. Thank you, first of all, to the museum for welcoming us so brilliantly, and for all their work they do to keep DH Lawrence and his legacy alive. Thank you to Jay Sandhu, to Hannah Trevarthen and to Billy Ivory, our fantastic panel. Thank you to our wonderful actors, Liam, Pardeep and Megan, and to Tim and Sarah at the Nottingham Actors Workshop, get that right. And thank you, of course, to you for watching. We're going to leave you with the very beautiful December Night.
Take off your cloak and your hat and your shoes, and draw up at my hearth where never woman sat. I have made the fire upright. Let us leave the rest in the dark and sit by firelight. The wine is warm in the hearth. The flickers come and go. I will warm your limbs with kisses until they glow.